So performance management and feedback is one of the core functions that is performed under the auspices of the HR department. Performance management can be explained as the system that is put in place to ensure that the actual performance of employees does not deviate from the standard that has been set for them to attain. So implicit in performance management system includes the provision of performance goals or performance standards to employees, the appraisal of employee performance periodically, and it also includes a follow-up discussion that ensues, that is supposed to, because in some circumstances it does not actually occur. So the follow-up discussion or forum that ensues between the appraisee and usually his or her manager or supervisor for some lessons to be drawn. And these lessons may take the form of the strengths and weaknesses and how these strengths can be sustained in the next performance calendar, as well as how the weaknesses can be corrected through some form of intervention. So anytime an attempt is made to go beyond performance evaluation of employees, but to rather put in place a mechanism that can sustain substantial performance of employees and also encourage them to overcome their deficiencies, then we are talking about a performance management system. So new texts that are cropping up tend to suggest that when you characterize this performance management system as an evaluation or an appraisal or as a form of measurement, then you are rather treating the performance of employees in the traditional sense. Now, before I come to the distinction between the traditional and the modern way of conducting performance management, you will all agree with me that any organization that aspires to remain competitive in its business environment needs to place much salience or importance on the performance of its workforce, because it is this performance that can be aggregated to constitute the attainment of the organization's strategic imperatives. So for that reason, performance management can be differently called performance evaluation, performance appraisal, and performance measurements. So in each of these respects, you are essentially referring to the same thing. Now, because of the instrumental role of performance management system in organizational success, it is now becoming more strategic issue than how it was treated in the past, because it has been seen as one of the avenues that can help a company to succeed if it actually wants to remain competitive. So this means that you are not supposed to only focus on the recruitment and selection of talented employees and their training and development, but you must equally be concerned about how you can have in place a robust performance management system that will bring out the best out of employees. So for that reason, it is also becoming a strategic issue that can be used to propel an organization to its desired outcome. So traditional performance appraisal simply involves an evaluative exercise between a supervisor and his subordinate. So it involves evaluative supervisory comments on past performance. What this means is that your supervisor will assess you and comment or give you feedback on how you have fared throughout the year. And if you are having in place a system whereby the performance appraisal is conducted twice in a year, then the feedback will be on how you have fared in the first half of the year, as well as in the second half of the year. So it tends to be retrospective in the traditional sense of conducting performance appraisal. Retrospective in the sense that it looks back to appraise how well or how worse an employee conducted him or herself. And we are saying that such a process does not involve any kind of management per se, as the only performance that can be managed is the present and future performance. Now, so the second aspect of this bullet is trying to say that if a performance management system becomes fixated with employees' previous outputs, then there wouldn't be much for management to be done, because management is interested in not only looking backward, but also how it can help an individual strive to succeed in the future. So the point I'm trying to communicate here is that unlike the traditional performance appraisal systems that were more concerned about employees' past performance records and activities, modern performance appraisal is expected to be much more comprehensive and expansive to consider other aspects such as the employee's future performance. So how well you can help the employee to succeed in future. So once you look at the past and the present as well as the future, then you'll be having a more robust performance management system. And performance appraisal involves hierarchical downward communication from supervisors to subordinates concerning the value the supervisor places on the subordinate's performance. Okay, so this is also bringing us back to the traditional one. And once this downward communication is derived as far as an employee's past performance is concerned, what does it become of the employee? There is a need to go beyond this to link it with how the employee can succeed in the next coming future. So performance appraisal as a component of performance management system is not expected to be a documentary activity of the HR through the supervisor of a department, but it is supposed to be forward-looking. So this implies that we are not expected to be conducting performance appraisals only when we anticipate the individual may be going for promotion. And so we'll have to put together some documents to support his promotional activity. But it is something that must be strategic in the sense that it must be concerned about what happened in the past and how that can be harnessed to help propel the individual as well as his organization to their future aspirations. So feedback usually in performance appraisals involves a mutual exchange of information that both parties share, discuss, and jointly assess in planning future work activities. And once this feedback component is integrated and utilized for future work activities, then you are expanding the frontiers of a performance management system. And that is what we recommend for organizations to derive value for such a performance management system. But unfortunately, most organizations do not have this dispensation as part of their performance management process. So they tend to be more of it tends to tailor along a downward communication from the supervisor to the subordinates. And there isn't much room for the discussion and joint planning on how future work activities can be executed. The appraisal often puts employees in a defensive position, whereas feedback usually perceived as more neutral and a process over which employees have some control and influence. So we are also admonishing that in order to transition from the traditional way of conducting performance management system to the adoption of a more feedback-driven approach, whereby emphasis is placed on both the past happenings, the present, and the future aspirations of the employee and their departments, it is appropriate to call the system performance evaluation and feedback instead of performance evaluation or performance appraisal. So if you took a sober look at the heading is performance management and feedback. Now, by integrating feedback into the management system or the appraisal system, it means you are equally concerned about the appraisal of the current performance of the employees, and you are also giving room for the voice of the employees to be heard, particularly to understand why they underperformed in certain respects and how, as a supervisor or a manager, you can help remedy the situation from recurring in future. So if you read the literature from 2020 upwards, you will come across terminologies, the usage of feedback instead of appraisals. You will hear them or you will see them using performance management and feedback instead of performance appraisal, because the appraisal is just a component of the performance management system. And even though it's an important component, there is the need to be forward-looking and to be considering how outcomes of the appraisal can be connected with the objectives that is supposed to be achieved in order to get better outcome of the situation. So the trend towards more streamlined organizations and hierarchies with fewer employees having broader job assignments have resulted in performance feedback taking on a more critical role than it's assumed in the past. So we are simply saying that given the current challenges that business organizations are confronting and the broader job description that employees are also concerned about now, there is also a transitioning from the traditional way of managing employees' performance to a more modern one that tends to give much room for employees' voice to be integrated. So organizations today cannot afford to have a weak links or unproductive employees. More than ever, organizations need broader measures of performance management to ensure that. So by broader measurement of employee performance, we are referring to the past performance of employees, their current performance, and their potential in the future. And by looking at all these facets, you will have a well laid out roadmap that can help the employee succeed. And this ensures that, one, the performance deficiencies are addressed in timely manner through employee development programs that meet the changing needs of organization and its market. So usually performance appraisers will sufficiently identify avenues where employees are falling short to meet their targets. And these avenues can be disaggregated, as we learned last week. It can be disaggregated into factors that are logistical or coming from management, and factors that has to do with the individual. So sometimes an employee may be underperforming, not because such a person is lazy or slothful. Rather, it could be that the requisite logistics that needs to enhance his contribution to organizational success are not forthcoming. So if that is the situation, on what basis will you be blaming the employee for non-performance? So for such circumstances, you will need to diagnose the performance deficiencies and find strategies that can be used to remedy these deficiencies. So a broader outlook to performance management and feedback will help to attain this. The second one is that employees' behaviors are also being channeled in appropriate direction towards performance of specific objectives that are consistent with work units and organizational strategy. So if you look at it in a broader sense, then you will also be able to link the success and weaknesses of an employee to the long-term strategies that have been set forth. And based on that, you can recalibrate and sustain the successful aspects of the employee performance, whilst you are also remedying the unsuccessful components. Then it also ensures that employees are provided with the appropriate and specific feedback to assist with their career development. And this is an important component that will help any employee flourish in their present dispensation as well as their future aspirations. So that is why it is necessary that after the conduct of a performance appraisal, an interview is held with the appraisee, or if you like, a forum or a discussion session is held with the appraisee to understand why the appraisee was rated in a particular regard. And these ratings may be favorable or unfavorable. So an explanation to some of these, the ratings that is being done by the manager or the supervisor needs to be communicated unequivocally to the appraisee. And that should also serve as an opportunity for the appraisee to voice out why they think they underperformed or succeeded in certain respects. So what I'm trying to say is that this forum, after the conduct of a performance appraisal, will serve as an avenue to provide feedback to the employee. Then the employee will also have room to voice out their challenges with the outcome of the appraisal in order for the communication to go back and forth and for a mutual understanding to be strived. Now, once this is done, it will take away all misconceptions, all negative perceptions, and negative connotations that one may be having about an appraisal outcome. So, I admittedly, appraisal process and performance management system can be very much political, in the sense that if you are not in the good book of your supervisor, sometimes you may be working hard and you may be working much better than your co-workers, but the outcome of the appraisal may suggest otherwise. And some of these forums may provide the avenue for you to clarify your misconceptions and your misunderstandings about some of these ratings with your supervisor. And once it is done in an open and an objective manner, dispassionately, it will end up reducing the confusions and the misunderstandings that were brewing between the parties. So that is why this modern one is being suggested and recommended. So what are the differences between the traditional performance appraisal system and the modern performance feedback that is being advocated for? So these are the thematic areas that I'll be using to discuss the differences. And these are the two main themes or types of performance management system that are of interest. So performance feedback. Now, research is contending that in terms of the time period or the time horizon, performance feedback tend to be focused on the past performance of employees, their current performance, and their future performance potentials. And it is able to map out a strategy that can trace out all these performance outcomes in order to see the trajectory, the performance trajectory of the employee in question. But the traditional one, which tends to be performance appraisal, is only backward looking. So it's fixated with the past performance of employees, and it may end up not connecting with any future objective that the company intends or aspires to attain. In terms of the focus, performance feedback links employees' work activities to specific business objectives. And the rationale behind this is that it's equally interested in the present and future performance of employees. On the contrary, performance appraisal tends to be an administrative activity of the HR department, wherein records are created on employee performance, and these records are documented, and it also places much salience on documented performance problems of employees. Okay. Now, in terms of nature of communication, performance feedback tends to be two-way communication streets, wherein the employee and the appraiser or the supervisor, if you like the manager, all have a voice or a say in the performance management system. On the contrary, performance appraisal tend to be traditional or one-sided or one-way communication street, whereby the feedback only comes from the supervisor or the appraiser. So it's one-sided, downward, directive, and it's also, because it is directive and downward, it tends to have room for rebuttal in the sense that sometimes when it is in a volatile or what is the word? In an environment that there is a lot of suspicions in it, then it may end up having, instead of being more dispassionate and objective, it may end up becoming more rebuttal. So it may end up becoming more confrontational. The role of employee. So in performance feedback systems, employee play an active role in it. They may even be involved right from the setting of performance standard and objectives. Because at the end of the day, it is these individuals that are going to attain it. So the performance standards and the performance management system is not imposed on the employee in question. Rather, the employee plays an active part in it. Conversely, the role of employees in performance appraisal is a passive role. So there is much passivity on the part of employees when it comes to performance appraisal. And this means that the employee is seen as only a receiver of the feedback. And it is only when the appraisal or evaluation comes to an end that it gets communicated to the employee. So that for that reason, the employee plays less active role in the appraisal system. The formality with which it is administered. Because performance feedback has a rationale of communicating in an open and friendly manner to employees, it integrates both formal and informal verbal approach, verbal communication in dealing with the employees. So sometimes, what I mean by the informal is that sometimes, because the supervisor has the interest of the employee at heart and may want the employee to succeed even before the time for appraisal is initiated, the supervisor may informally draw the attention of the subordinates to certain facets that need to be improved to enhance the contribution and the performance of the employee in question. For performance appraisal, it tends to reify the role of the appraiser and appraisee in a formal system that needs within which each of the stakeholders need to know their locus. So it also thrives in a more bureaucratic system whereby adhering to lay down protocols and procedures is the norm. So such system will require that everyone knows their role and when things are supposed to be done, when appraisals are supposed to be done, what you must do in order to pass an appraisal system and so on and so forth. So whereas the that of performance feedback tends to be informal and verbal, the performance appraisal tends to be highly formal, and it involves the use of written forms with signatures appended on it to signify the formality and the seriousness that is attached to it. That under the performance feedback system, it may just be a mere observation from the supervisor and a verbal feedback that is given just to help the person thrive. Timing. So because it is more informal and under the performance feedback, in terms of timing too, there is much spontaneity. So it is spontaneous. It is also ad hoc when needed. But the performance appraisal is prescribed. And that is the danger. When we say it is prescribed, it means that assuming we are doing it once in a year and things are going haywire, the prescription will recommend that you still wait till the time that is right for you to conduct the appraisal. But under performance feedback, if the supervisor senses danger, spontaneously and in a timely manner, they will intervene to remedy and fine-tune the situation. So in terms of timing, performance feedback tends to be more, it tends to be more concerned about getting the right thing done, irrespective of the time that has been set for appraisal to be done. But the performance appraiser will expect the calendar year to reach the pedestal where you are supposed to conduct the appraisal before they come in to give feedback. And that is a danger. Now, basis of relationship, it tends to be collegial and performance feedback. And that creates the room for employees' voice to be integrated in the performance management system. So collegial simply means that you create a harmonious and a more engaging environment that empowers others to voice out their views and observations. But under the performance appraisal system, there is huge power distance. Role of supervisor. So the supervisor acts as a coach, a motivator, or a partner who wants the employee to succeed in the end. So the employee's interest is as the heart of the supervisor who is conducting the performance management system under a performance feedback. Unlike in performance appraisal, wherein the supervisor tends to come across as an authority figure who is in to perform a function and just give feedback. In terms of outcomes, performance feedback tends to employ a participatory, enhanced, and targeted performance outcomes. So what this means is that the evaluation of employees' contribution to organizational success may be contingent on how well the individuals have participated. So the sort of behaviors that is culminating to the performance will all be factored. Issues like how you interact and intercommunicate with your other colleagues, how you participate in departmental and unit meetings, how well you are able to take or willing to take initiatives and all that. So it considers all these aspects. It also looks at how well you've been able to attain your set objectives. So that will be the targeted performance. If, for instance, you are supposed to be evaluated based on the number of sales or volume of sales you are able to make, or the number of, let's say, students you're able to recruit for your university, or the number of customers you're able to get for your company, then that will be the targeted performance. It also looks at relationship and all that. Now, in terms of performance appraisal, usually the outcomes are utilized for compensation decisions and task directives. So if your how do you call it, whether your salary will be increased or remain unchanged, it will be contingent on the outcome of your appraisal. So usually when individuals are due for promotion and we say, let's go and pull the appraisal, it's simply going to communicate whether they are actually due for the promotion and they deserve the compensation that is going to be accompanying their promotional activities. And it also serves as a benchmark to decide which task should be given to the employee and which task should be taken away from the task composition of the individual. So these are some minor differences that you can make as far as performance feedback, which is a modern way of managing employees' performance and performance appraisal is concerned. The strategic choices in performance management system. So, as far as the strategic element of a performance management system is concerned, research is suggesting that due to the integral role that performance management systems have to play in employee and organizational success, there is the need for 5 strategic decisions to be taken in order to help realize the potential of any desired performance management system. So what are these 5 strategic decisions? Now, in the course of my discussion, I'll be detailing out the subcomponents of these strategic decisions. So if, for instance, the first strategic decision is to determine the purpose of performance management system, I will go ahead to detail the purpose of a performance management system before I go on to the next strategic choice that can help performance management system meet its desired objectives. So let's continue. The first strategic choice is to determine the purpose of the performance management system. In other words, before you even set out and roll out a performance management system, you must know the purpose or the rationality of having such a system in place. So what are some of the purpose of a performance management system? The first purpose of performance management system is to facilitate employees' development. This simply means that performance management system is not an avenue to punish employees for non-performance, but it is actually an avenue to find solutions to employees' performance problems. And by so doing, that is integrating it in place remedies that can help propel the performance of the employee, you will end up facilitating the development trajectory of such an employee. So by assessing the deficiencies in performance levels and skills, an organization can determine the specific training and development needs. And in fact, the performance feedback process can be designed to provide information to fuel organizational training and development programs, which we learned in rich details last week. Indeed, I indicated last week that the reason why we conduct training needs assessment is that we want to be armed with information on the performance problems that employees are encountering. And once you are armed to the nail and teeth with such information, you can utilize it to develop a training program, which when properly implemented, can help remedy the situation by filling the skill gaps and the skill deficiencies that are being experienced by employees. And once this is done, it will help the employees to develop. So that is the first purpose of a performance management system. The second purpose of a performance management system is to determine appropriate reward and compensation. So in this day and age, employees are supposed to be paid for their contribution to organizational success, but not paid merely on the basis of the certificates that they are holding. And so later on next semester, we'll be learning some compensation strategies such as incentive pay system. Incentive pay system. So when we talk about an incentive pay system, it simply means that you are trying to motivate or incentivize employees to contribute to organizational success in return for a substantial reward. And this suggests that you may have a PhD or a master's degree in an organization, but if the outcome of our performance feedback suggests that your contribution to organizational success is negligible compared to someone who may be an HND holder, then the HND holder may be earning much higher than you. And this is so because we are using the performance outcome of individuals as a basis to pay them. So when we say performance management system is to determine appropriate rewards and compensation, we are simply saying that we want to pay people for good job done. And how will we know whether they are doing good job or they are not doing good job? We will know this by comparing their actual performance with their set standards. And when we are doing these comparisons, the credentials that you held for you to be recruited into the organization may not count so much. And this is so because most will be the will be HND, but a lot of experience in their job. And that experience may be propelling the person to what? Flourish over and above those that are having first degree and master's degree and so on and so forth. So that means that when it comes to the compensation for organizational success, such individuals that are excelling so much needs to be recognized. And that will even motivate other onlookers to also work very hard. For that reason, employees must understand and accept the performance feedback system as a prerequisite for accepting decisions made relative to rewards and compensation. And any perceived unfairness of the performance feedback system on part of the employee will result in perceived unfairness on the compensation system. So when we say a compensation system is fair, it means that it must identify hardworking employees and reward them substantially. And it must also recognize individuals that are struggling to perform and compensate them much below the ones that are working very hard. So that is the second purpose. The third one is that performance management system also seeks to enhance employee motivation. And this is derived from the formal process that allows for employees' acknowledgement and praise to be communicated. And this can reinforce behaviors and outcomes that may even be highly appreciated by the employee over and above the salary that they are taking. So sometimes when employees are excelling in their line of duty, and as a supervisor, you recognize them by praising them in front of their peers. Some organizations are very good at this, and they even end up having or creating a citation that will be displayed in their how do you call it? Their their office or their lobby. So when the customers troop in and every employee is also passing around and they lift up their head, they will see Mr. So and so was adjudged the most promising employee among his peers, or the hardworking employee of the year. Now, some of these praises and recognition may go a long way to motivate employees beyond the appraisal. And it is a good strategy to also motivate onlookers. And these onlookers may be your co-workers or colleagues that also aspire and draw inspiration from such recognition. So if you want to also be recognized for such excellence, then it means that you need to work harder in order to be recognized in that regard. So that becomes an avenue to motivate employees. And it is through performance management system that you can get the information that you can utilize for such outcomes. The fourth purpose of a performance management system is to facilitate legal compliance. Legal compliance. So an employee or a subordinate may make a case against a supervisor that they have been wrongly appraised or erroneously appraised. And what I mean by erroneously appraised here is that they may construe that the ratings that the supervisor is giving them compared to their co-workers is unfavorable. Now, if this claim is made, and for that reason, the individual was sacked because of such ratings, once this case is held in the court of competent jurisdiction, there will be the need for some records or information to be provided from the company that has been sued by the injured party. So a performance management system will have a trajectory of bad performance on such an employee in question. And when some of these documented evidence are submitted during the time the case is being held, then it can help to demonstrate that the employee is not being erroneously appraised and I say erroneously sacked, but the employee is being given the opportunity to leave the company because of non-performance after several warnings and opportunity for the person to be what? Improved. So that is how the performance management system can be used to facilitate legal compliance. And the last one, which I was able to come up with, is that performance management system facilitates the human resource planning process. We learned in level 300, I think in my, is it second lecture, that human resource planning is all about the series of actions and projections that the HR does in order to identify and in order to verify whether the company has the right number of employees of right quality at the right time and at the right position or place in a cost-effective manner. So at all points in time, human resource planning is trying to make sure that the company has right quality and quantity of employees. And ensuring right quality and quantity will mean that you don't need to compromise on the quality of performance that is being displayed by the workforce. So this will mean if employees are demonstrating performance problems or performance deficiencies, then as part and parcel of the human resource planning strategy, you may need to remedy the situation with some interventions such as training that can correct and improve these performance deficiencies. It can also be an avenue to rely upon when you are recruiting new staff into the company. So the current performance records that you are deriving, especially if individuals with a particular background and experience are struggling to flourish on the job, then in future, when you are making new recruitment into the system, then you have to consider it and overcome those ones. So that is how it can be used for human resource planning processes. So just to recap what I've said so far, the first purpose of the first strategic choice of any performance management system is to... Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So the first strategic decision or choice of a performance management system is to identify the purpose of the performance management system. So far, all that I've said hovers around this. And the purpose of any performance management system may be to develop the employee by identifying their strengths and weaknesses and how these weaknesses can be remedied through T&D. To determine rewards and compensation, to enhance motivation by recognizing and praising hardworking employees, and also encouraging those lagging behind to work harder, to facilitate legal compliance, and also to facilitate human resource planning. Now, so that is the first strategic decision or choice in performance management system. The second one is to decide who does the evaluation. Who is more apt or appropriate to conduct the performance management system? Is it the supervisor of the employee? Is it the peers or co-workers of the employee? Is it the subordinates of the employee? Is it the customers that the employee directly serves? Or should we allow the employee himself to do the appraisal and provide instances and feedback on how well they fared during the performance calendar? So who is actually more appropriate to conduct the appraisal? That would be the second strategic choice. The third one will be, what do you have to evaluate? Do you need to evaluate the traits of the employee, such as their personality, whether the person is hardiness, the person is outgoing, and so on and so forth? Do you need to consider the behavior, such as how communicative the person is, how he interacts and intercommunicates, participation in extra corporate social responsibilities of the company? And do you also need to focus on results, such as so results can be several metrics, such as the revenue target of the person. Results could also be linked to issues such as attendance, absenteeism. It could also be how well you serve your customers, and so on and so forth. So which of these metrics will be to be the focus when you are doing the evaluation. Now, still on the evaluation, how do you evaluate it? Do you do it in absolute terms or do you do it in relative terms? In absolute terms will mean that you are only centering on the individual to give feedback on their success or otherwise, as far as their performance outcome is concerned. So absolute terms, you are singling out the individual and you are giving them feedback. And you are not comparing it to their co-workers. But in relative terms, you may want to find out how the employee is performing in comparison with their peers. So you are relating the performance, relative simply means you are relating the performance of the individual in question with their co-workers. And the means of evaluating, so that is the last strategic choice or strategic decision. You have to select a means to conduct the performance evaluation. And there are several of them. We have the graphic or linear rating scale, the weighted checklist, the BARS, which is also known as behaviorally anchored rating scale, the BOSS, which is behavior observation scale, critical incidents, and objective-based assessments. So, in a nutshell, these are the strategic decisions, the 5 strategic decisions that needs to be navigated when it comes to any performance management system. The first one is identifying the purpose of the management system. Then the second one is deciding on who does the evaluation. The third one is identifying what to evaluate. The fourth one is navigating how to do the evaluation. And the last one is selecting the evaluation strategy. So we are currently done with the purpose. We are now moving on to who does the evaluation. So still on the strategic choices that needs to be made in any performance management system, another important decision that needs to be taken is who does the evaluation, who evaluates. So traditionally, performance evaluation was performed by employee's immediate supervisor, who communicates to the employee the supervisory assessment of the performance. And this system offered very little opportunity for inputs or feedback from the employee. This approach by itself can be problematic for a number of reasons. So when you use the traditional sense whereby the voice of employees is relegated to the background, you are likely to encounter a number of challenges. And what are some of them? One, immediate supervisors often do not have the appropriate information to provide feedback, to provide informed feedback, and do not observe the employee's day-to-day work enough to assess performance accurately. You all agree with me that in your various organizations and offices where you work, you may not share the same office with your supervisor. Rather, you share the same office with your peers or your co-workers, or what we construe as your colleagues. For that reason, your immediate supervisor, who has the power to conduct the appraisal, may not be privy to your day-to-day behavioral activities that culminates to your performance. And they may, for that matter, not consider these day-to-day aspects of your contribution to organizational success. So it will be important for you to introduce another element or stakeholder that may be familiar with your day-to-day activity. And this may be the customers that you are serving on a daily basis, or the peers or co-workers that you are working with. So indirectly, after explaining the problem, then I tell you some of the solutions. So pay attention to how I am articulating it. The second problem is that it is also common in today's organizations for supervisors not to be current on the technical dimensions of subordinates' work, which may be best evaluated by peers, customers, and other external constituencies. So your supervisor may have a fair knowledge about what goes into your job, but in terms of the technicalities and the challenges or the realities which are on the ground, they may fall short of some rich details. And these rich details, if they are considered during the evaluation and they are factored to explain why you are succeeding and or why you are facing challenges, it may help develop the employee well for their present and their future performance aspirations. And that is why it is important to consider other constituencies such as customers, peers, and other stakeholders. And the third problem is that technical line managers often have no training in or appreciation of the process and can see it as nothing more than an administrative burden. So in the strict sense of it, most line managers are presumed to be well informed about an appraisal technique that may be administered by an organization. And so they may not be taken through some formal tutelage on how to administer such an appraisal system. So if this is the situation, and the line manager who is supposed to do this appraisal is even not knowledgeable about the content and expectations of the appraisal system, then they may end up either boycotting the system or erroneously appraising employees. So in order to buffer the whole process, you may have to consider other constituencies or stakeholders so that it can give you a better perception and appreciation of how the employee fared on the job as far as their performance is concerned. And lastly, performance assessment is also an inherently subjective process that is prone to a variety of perceptual errors by supervisors. So admittedly, supervisors or performance raters are humans, and they may not have their eyes on all the rich details that can be considered to give an objective rating of an employee. In fact, research suggests that if you task 2 or more appraisers or supervisors to rate the same employee they are working with, they may end up giving different appraisal reports. Whereas the first rater may rate the employee as an excellent and hardworking performer, the second and third rater may think otherwise because of the subjectivity which these appraisers bring on board. So to buffer and cushion some of these subjectivity, it is imperative to consider other stakeholders such as peers, customers, subordinates, and sometimes the employee, him or herself, their own ratings, to sort of do a thorough comparison and see where the ratings are being gotten right or wrong. So this means that if your supervisor, in tandem with all these stakeholders, that is your peers and customers, are all saying you are a non-performer, then there is more room for improvement. And there is also a call for swift action to remedy the situation. But if your supervisor is giving you poor ratings, but your customers and your peers are giving you favorable ratings, then there is the need for us to have a post-appraisal session to identify why these varied ratings are cropping up. Varied ratings in the sense that one of the stakeholders is praising you, whereas others are also downgrading you. And what is informing their ratings? So we are going to look at some of the rating errors or appraisal errors that can be committed by supervisors who are construed as humans and are bound to commit mistakes during their appraisals. So the first one is what we call halo effects. Halo effects. Don't forget, we are now on the second strategic decision that needs to be taken in order to help make performance management system realize its strategic elements. And the first one is that it should be able to identify the purpose of the performance management system. And the second one that we are discussing now is that it should be able to identify who will be more appropriate to conduct the appraisal. Now, we are also discussing some of the errors that can be committed when the supervisor is conducting the performance appraisal. And the first one is halo effects. Halo effect simply means that the rater allows one positive or negative trait, outcome, or consideration to influence other measures. Halo effects, so I'm taking it again. Halo effect is said to have occurred when the rater, and the rater in this context means the supervisor, allows one positive attributes of the ratee to influence other measures. So an example, if an employee is often late for work, and that fact may impact ratings having nothing to do with tardiness, then we can say halo effect has occurred. Let me give another example. Let's say I'm conducting an interview to recruit potential employees for my organization. And someone walked in with dreadlocks as a hairstyle. So it could be a lady or a gentleman. The person walks in with a dreadlocks. And I utilize this perception that I have derived to conclude that this will not be a hardworking person. Or I conclude that a person may indulge in substance use, such as marijuana, and so on and so forth. Such a conclusion can be construed as halo effect because I'm just using one, in this context, there is one negative trait to influence other evaluations that I'll be doing. Now, a distinction can be made between halo effect and devil's horn effect. Now, if these evaluations are done in the positive light, then we call it halo effect. If it is in the negative light, then it is called devil's horn effect. So, devil horn, abebeng, devil's horn effect. So when the example over here will actually be construed as a devil's horn effect occurring because we are using the negative aspects of the work, which is the employee's work, which is lateness, to conclude that the person is what? Tardy. And if we were using punctuality to conclude that the person is hardworking, that one will be a halo effect, in the sense that punctuality is necessary but not sufficient to communicate superior performance. In other words, if you look at the attendance records of employees, some may not be absent throughout the year, but their contribution to organizational success may be nothing to write home about. So that is what I mean by punctuality is necessary but not sufficient to organizational or superior performance. The second rating error is stereotyping or personal bias. Stereotyping or personal bias. So stereotyping simply means that the rater or the supervisor makes performance judgments based on characteristics of the employee rather than the employee's performance. So it means you are rating the person on the basis of the group that they belong to. Maybe as for accounts, they are this way. As for AWS, they are this way. As for Muslims, they are that way. Now, if you give favorable ratings or unfavorable ratings to employees on the basis of their grouping or the characteristics that they fall into instead of their actual performance, then stereotyping error has occurred. At the end of the day, we are not rating individuals on the basis of their ethnicity, their religiosity, or their sexual orientation, but we are interested in how well they are contributing to organizational success. Then there is also contrast error or contrast effects. Contrast error is said to have occurred when employees' assessment is based on those being given to other employees. So the opposite, so let me give an example of contrast error. Just a minute. Contrast error. Let's take this class for instance. Under what circumstance will we say contrast error has occurred? Let's say I am marking your end of semester exams, right? I'm marking end of semester exams. And I picked Francisca's paper to mark. After marking, I was blown away with her level of intelligence and in-depth understanding that has been demonstrated in the exam. So I now utilize Francisca's write-up, that is her examination paper, or what the content that Francisca wrote, as my marking scheme to mark the remaining students' work, instead of using my own marking scheme. Don't forget, every lecturer is supposed to have his own marking scheme that is going to be used as the basis to mark students' exams submissions. Now, if I end up using Francisca's write-up, because I am so enthused by how well she wrote, instead of using my own marking scheme, then contrast error has occurred. Now, the problem with contrast error is that sometimes students may be writing things that are in my marking scheme, but not in what Francisca wrote. But because I have now become elated by her style of writing, I may end up not considering things that are equally in my marking scheme. And for that reason, I may end up marking students that are supposed to pass as failures. So that is a typical example of contrast error. Contrast error in the world of work can also be take form in a situation where the supervisor, after appraising the first employee, puts aside the standards that are supposed to be used in appraising them, and rather uses the appraisal report of the first person that was appraised to rate the remaining employees. Regency error. Now, regency error occurs in situations in which the evaluation is biased towards events and behaviors that are happening immediately. So in fact, it is supposed to be recency. Let me do the correction quickly. Recency. And when we say recency, it simply means recent. Things that are occurring recently. So recency error or recency effect is said to have occurred whenever the supervisor that is conducting the performance appraisal places much salience and importance on recent events instead of all the things that transpired throughout the year. Let me give a typical example. An example could be that during the evaluation of performance in a given year, from January to December, an employee has been working assiduously to the admiration of everyone in the company. But in the last month of the year, the person indulged in absenteeism for a number of days. Now, if the supervisor considers only this absenteeism as a basis of evaluating the performance of the employee, instead of considering all the things that transpired throughout the year, then the error that has occurred is recency error or recency effect. It simply means that the supervisor is picking only recent happenings to base his evaluation on. Now, so the opposite of recency error is what we call primacy error. So let me quickly insert it. Primacy error. And I'm going to explain, so please pay rapt attention to it. The opposite of recency error or recency effect is primacy error. And primacy error is said to have occurred when the supervisor places much emphasis and salience on events that occurred during the beginning of the year, instead of factoring all the events that occurred throughout the year. This means that if, for instance, from the beginning of the year, the individual was excelling, but the remaining portions of the year, the individual was struggling to perform, and the supervisor only measures on the aspects of performance that occurred during the beginning of the year and minus on the aspects of performance problems that occurred in the middle and at the end of the year, then primacy error has occurred. So the bottom line is that during performance appraisal, supervisors are supposed to factor all the nuances, everything that transpired during the year. And to do this job very well, you must have a diary where you'll be recording some specific and critical incidents that can be utilized in future to serve as a basis to be rating your employees. That is what best practice recommends. The next rating error is what we call central tendency error. Central tendency error. In central tendency error, the evaluator avoids giving high or low performance ratings. They avoid giving high or low performance ratings. So they are giving everyone average, 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 average. The problem with central tendency error is that whereas an employee may be demonstrating superior performance and for that matter, merits higher ratings, a central tendency rating will not recognize the excellence of such an employee. In the same vein, a non-performing employee will be favored by a central tendency rating because such a non-performing employee who must get below average will be getting an average rating. So it is problematic because it will not be recognizing deserving and hardworking candidates. And it may come across as, it may demoralize them for not recognizing their excellence. Whereas it may also be reinforcing non-performing employees because at the end of the day, they are not performing, but you are still giving them average. So what would be the incentive for them to work harder? After all, they will get the average even when they do not work hard. So that is a problem with central tendency error. And the last two rating errors that are likely to be committed by supervisors because of how human they are and how attached they sometimes become, they are to their employees is what we call leniency versus strictness error. So in fact, it is 2-in-1 rating error. What does it mean to be experiencing leniency error? So leniency error occurs when the supervisor is excessively lenient to the employees. And strictness error occurs when the supervisor or the rater is excessively strict. So it means the rater is rating with iron hands or an iron fist. All right, please, are these explanations clear as far as the rating errors are concerned? Are the explanations clear? All right, I take it that you are okay with it so far. In fact, next semester, God willing, when you take performance management course, you will be doing all these things in rich details. So that is actually an area of specialization. So when you get there, I am hoping the one that will be teaching will take his time to actually be linking it. But for our purpose, we are just interested in the strategic aspects. But I thought it wise to be linking them in order to give you a comprehensive appreciation. So, still on who does the evaluation, I've talked about the possible rating errors that are likely to be committed. But in terms of who actually does it, from the preceding discussions that I have elaborated, it is clear that supervisors are likely to get some things wrong. And this might be intentional or unintentional. Beyond this, sometimes supervisors and subordinates may also agree on the level of performance, but disagree on the etiology or causes of such performance. So whereas the supervisors may be contending that the performance or non-performance is because of the employee's tardiness or laziness, the employee may also have a different point of view by contending that their non-performance or performance is as a result of some logistical issues. So due to these disparities that are likely to crop up as a result of the humanness of supervisors, it is important to recognize and involve other stakeholders in this evaluation process so that when some of these disagreements crop up, then such opinions can be utilized as alternatives to find solution to the confusion popping up. So for these reasons, organizations have been moving away from the traditional means of performance feedback, where only one assessment of an employee is conducted and completed by the immediate supervisor. In addition to the supervisory input, performance feedback can also be sought from peers, subordinates, customers, and other employees. So, feedback from peers on what we are, so who can evaluate beyond the supervisor? It means the peers of the employee can also do the evaluation. Feedback from peers can be useful for developmental purposes, but peer feedback system must be administered with care, because there are some companies that there's sort of animosity and conflicts transpiring within the co-workers. It will be disingenuous and suicidal to ask peers to be rating themselves. They will be doing it passionately and not objectively under such circumstances. That is why we say it has to be done with fear, with care. So it means peer feedback system can be very political and self-serving in organizations where employees compete with each other, either formally or informally. So if, for instance, there is a reward at stake and each of the peers is competing to come out as deserving for this reward, then definitely everyone will be down rating or intentionally downgrading the ratings that they give to their peers. So when a peer has a personal gain or loss at stake in the assessment of a colleague, he or she can hardly be expected to exercise it objectively. Competitive organizational cultures could cause peer evaluation system to raise havoc throughout the organization by escalating conflicts. And this could have detrimental effects on the morale and teamwork. So peer feedback system can only be effective when political considerations and consequences are minimized, which means you must have a good organizational culture that is able to manage organizational politics and place the interests of the organization above and over the interests of individuals and cliques and as a groupings within it. Now, under such a system, employees have a sense of trust in the organization and its performance management system. So that is evaluation or feedback from peers. Now, performance feedback from subordinates. So one of the constituencies or stakeholders that can be utilized in the performance feedback system is your subordinates. And this is usually rolled out when the employee in question has people working beneath him or her. Now, this subordinate feedback can provide insights on the interpersonal and managerial style of employees, and it can assist the organization in addressing employee developmental needs, particularly for high potential employees. So your subordinates may be beneath you, but they are the ones that can candidly and objectively provide feedback on the leadership style that you are administering over their heads. And once they are subordinating under you, it means as a supervisor, you have the potential to occupy other higher positions in the organizations. And how well can we ascertain whether you have what it takes to flourish at the upper echelon of the company? It is through these feedbacks and information that we'll be deriving from the subordinates that we can use it to juxtapose your competence for occupying future superior positions. So that is it for the feedback from subordinates. You can all agree with me. In fact, you will all agree with me that our economy is becoming increasingly service-oriented. And for that reason, many organizations are emphasizing more on customer service as a key competitive and strategic issue. So gone are the days where a chunk of most economies were, in terms of percentage, highly industrial. Currently speaking, most economies are driven by the service sector. And what I mean by the service sector is where companies set up to provide services to customers, not necessarily through industries. So under such dispensations, customers are increasingly being sought for feedback on employee performance. And this is imperative because the customers are seen as playing an instrumental role in the success or the failure of the company. In other words, if the customers are not feeling satisfied, then they may end up dumping you to join your competitors. And that may not augur well for the company. So getting periodic feedback from your customers will help you to know how best you can serve them and also retain them. In most instances, customers can provide the feedback that is most free from bias. Because at the end of the day, if you are satisfying the customer, they will openly tell you. And if they are not satisfied, they will also openly tell you objectively. And they usually have little or nothing at stake in their assessment of employee. So feedback from customers can be critical for facilitating employee development and determining appropriate rewards because it is most clearly related to the organization's bottom line. That is, if the organization can succeed, it will be contingent on how best they are able to satisfy their customers. And those that directly deal with these customers can be evaluated on the basis of how well or how unwell they are serving these customers, so that if they are doing it unprofessionally or below standard, then we can utilize such feedback from the customers to improve upon the performance and the delivery of such employees. Self-evaluation. So beyond the supervisors, the peers, the subordinates, and the customers, another integral stakeholder that can also be called upon to provide performance feedback on employees is the employee himself. So that is what we mean by self-evaluation. Why is it important to also give employees an opportunity to have a voice in their own evaluation? It allows employees to provide their own assessment and measures of their own performance. Now, although it should be obvious that self-evaluation can be self-serving, they can bloat their performance, or they can exaggerate how well they have performed. Allowing employees to evaluate their own performance has at least two important benefits for the organization. So what benefits do organizations and supervisors stand to derive if they incorporate self-evaluation as one of the constituencies that will be utilized in the performance feedback? The first benefit is that it can be motivating because it allows the employee to participate in a critical decision that impacts his or her employment and career. So if you give the room to an employee to appraise themselves, that tends to incentivize them that you are actually not only going to impose your ratings on them, but you are involving them to also tell you how they think introspectively, how they think they fared on their job as far as their performance is concerned. And that can be a good way to boost their morale. The second benefit is that the employee can provide rich details, insights, examples, and more holistic assessment of performance than that provided by the supervisors or peers, who generally spend a limited time observing and interacting with each employee. So sometimes the reason behind an employee's non-performance may not be obviously available to a second person unless they willingly do a thorough diagnosis to understand it. So if you give the employee room to identify their own strengths, their weaknesses, their success and their failures, and what they think can be done to address the situation in the present and also in the future, you will be amazed with the suggestions that they may be propelling, which when taken in good faith and implemented may go a long way to help them succeed in future. So that is the second benefit. And this is particularly important because individual employees are far more likely to remember significant examples of effective performance than their supervisors. Sometimes supervisors, not the things that happened in the beginning of the year or in the middle, they may not take cognizance of them when they are doing their appraisal at the end of the year. And so the self-evaluation component may bring forth all these important considerations for the supervisor to utilize at the end of the day. They often provide specific examples of behaviors, outcomes, rather than generalities often cited by supervisors. And individual employees may also be able to provide performance information of which others may be unaware. So that goes a long way to suggest that when self-evaluation is implemented in a more planned manner, it can go a long way to provide relevant information that can be utilized by the HR department together with the supervisors to improve the performance lots of an employee. So we are now going to look at a summary of what I've just explained as far as these multi-stakeholders in conducting performance appraisal is concerned. So still on the strategic decision on who is more apt or appropriate to conduct the performance appraisal, granted that an organization has decided to utilize a number of constituencies or stakeholders to conduct the performance appraisal, including the supervisor, the peers, subordinates, customers, and let's say the self-evaluation system. We technically, and in the field of HR, we call it a multi-rater system or the 360-degree feedback system. The multi-rater system or the 360-degree feedback system. So this performance appraisal system simply means that we are utilizing a modern appraisal system that takes into consideration the views and ratings of several stakeholders, including the peers of the employee, his supervisor, his subordinates, his customers, if he deals directly with customers, his subordinates, if he has some subordinates, and then self-appraisal. So the 360-degree feedback system can be beneficial because the organization and the employee gain multiple perspectives from all these stakeholders that I enumerated, and insight into the employee's performance. And each of these sources of performance feedback can balance each other relatively to any inherent organizational politics that may be at play in the process. So if, for instance, for the volatile and political nature transpiring within an organization, the employee is not comfortable about the ratings of his supervisor, then it is expected that the other stakeholders' ratings may buffer the ratings that were provided by the supervisor. In the same vein, if the competitive nature of the organization is resulting in the peers underrating each other, then we expect the other stakeholders who will also be rating the same employee in question to come out with feedback that can actually help cushion and balance the rating errors that may crop up. So it suffices to say that when you use the 360-degree feedback system or a multi-source, multi-rater approach of performance feedback, performance appraisal, you will end up appraising an employee with different spectacle. And because the employee will be analyzed by each of these stakeholders from different spectacle, you will get a comprehensive appreciation of the true performance of the employee. But it has a lot of drawbacks. Drawbacks in the sense that it takes a lot of time to administer and implement this 360-degree feedback system, because you will have to exhaust the feedback and the ratings of all these stakeholders, and the analysis can also take a lot of time. So it is costly and it is also timely. But when you do the cost benefits analysis and you think the company stands to derive much benefits from it as compared to the costs in terms of money and time, then you may have to roll it out. So as I speak with you, GCTU has this 360-degree feedback system in place. And that is why at the end of every semester, students are given the opportunity to appraise their lecturers. And some of the videos that I record in my class, I send it to my HOD or my some colleague lecturers to rate me, listen to it, and give me feedback on some avenues that I can improve and things that I'm getting well in my delivery. Then, so that if I give it to my supervisor to appraise me, that will be, my HOD to appraise me, it will be my supervisor. Then if I give it to my colleague lecturer to appraise me, that will be my peer. And you students, we will become my customers, because you are the one that the university is serving, or I'm serving directly. Okay. So that is how GCT is also employing the 360-degree feedback system into the appraisal of employees. Now, the 360-degree feedback system got the name 360 because if you look at the Cartesian plane, and when we say Cartesian, do you know the Cartesian plane? I remember teaching last semester. Have you heard about the Cartesian plane before? Hello, are you there?
Yes, sir, we are there.
Yes, sir.
So do you know the Cartesian plane? Well, when you just say it, and let me see, who knows Cartesian plane? Didn't you go to secondary school? So you are all trying to tell me you don't know the Cartesian plane. Is that the case? Asemo. Okay, now I'm running the cats. Running the cats. Now, Monte, X and Y axis. Sir, yeah, graph for X and Y. But you didn't know that is what you mean by the Cartesian plane. So that is what I've drawn on the screen. It was named after Rene.
Oh, yeah, okay, yes.
So that is the Cartesian plane. Now, I would say, if you look at the plane I've drawn on and also if you look at the X and Y diagram I've drawn on the screen now, at every quadrant, so it has 4 main quadrants, 1, 2, 3, 4. Each quadrant is what? And each quadrant makes up to what? How many degrees?
90.
90 degrees, very good. So the moment you move from one quadrant to the other, then just a minute. So for X and Y axis now, every quadrant here is 90 degrees. So the 360-degree feedback system also got its name from this Cartesian plane demarcations. And the logic is that the employee will be at the center here. The employee will be at the center. And around the employee, there are several constituencies or stakeholders. So you have the supervisor here. You may have the peers here. Yes. You may have the customers here. And you may have the subordinates here. And in some dispensation, if there is no customer, then it can be replaced by self-evaluation. So it means around 360 around the employee, all the stakeholders that matter are giving ratings or feedback to the employee. And that is how it got the name 360-degree feedback system. And that is also another way of explaining the multi-rater or multi-source multi-rater approach. All right, let's make progress. Now, so we have exhausted two main themes as far as the strategic decisions that need to be taken to help performance management system flourish. And this includes 1, identifying the purpose of the performance management system, and 2, identifying who is appropriate. And based on the discourse that has transpired so far, the most appropriate person, depending on your organizational dispensation, may be your supervisor or it may involve some additional constituencies such as your peers, co-workers, subordinates, and customers, and what have you. Now, what then needs to be evaluated? In other words, when these stakeholders are conducting the appraisal, what should they focus on? So what to evaluate is our next strategic decision or question to address. Essentially, employee evaluation can be based on their traits, their behavior, or the results or outcome that they achieve. So when you are asked to explain what can be the focus of an appraisal system, you will just have to simply say that the focus can be on the traits of the employees, their behavior that is culminating to the results that they are attaining, and the results itself. So trait-based measures, what are they? When we say the measures is focusing on the traits, trait-based measures focuses on the general abilities, characteristics, temperaments of the employee. And they might include dimensions such as loyalty to the organization, level of industriousness, gregariousness, and so on and so forth. Sometimes we are even interested in how the level of openness of the person, the level of introversion or extroversion of the person, the level of agreeableness of the person. Although assessment of traits can often allow organization to determine how employee fits with the organizational culture, such measures ignore what employee actually does. So for instance, if we say for a PR job, we are interested in assessing how outgoing or extroverted the person is. How is this level of outgoing or extroversion able to translate to the actual performance of the job? So we may end up committing a fallacy that we call fallacy of begging the question. Fallacy of begging the question simply means that you are trying to answer a question, but you are going around in circles and using parameters that actually does not explain or answer the question. So that is fallacy of begging the question. So trait-based measures, therefore, are limited. And they also tend to be subjective because whereas you may think someone is very much industrious, another person may have a different perception altogether. And that brings us to the behavior-based measures. So behavior-based measures primarily focuses on what an employee does by examining specific behaviors of the employee. And it is usually these behaviors that leads to the attainment of results or set standards of the employee. Factors assessed under behavioral measures might include the employee's ability to get along with others. So how well are you able to get along with others? Are you the type that is almost always fighting with everyone but yourself? So are you the type that is of the view that everyone is wrong and you are always right? It may also consider factors such as punctuality. So punctuality here, we are referring to attendance, willingness to take initiative, ability to meet deadlines, and so on and so forth. These are behaviors which, when properly executed, will yield and propel someone to succeed in attaining the desired results. Now, just as we discussed some problems associated with the trait-based ones, behavioral measures are very useful for feedback purposes because they specify exactly what the employee is doing correctly and what the employee should do differently to achieve superior results. And this is critical as work-related behaviors are generally within the control of most employees. So issues about punctuality, taking initiative, meeting deadlines, and usually within the ambit of the employee. Now, the third basis for performance feedback, beyond the traits and the behavior measures, is the results or outcome measures. Results-based measures focuses on specific accomplishments, direct outcomes of an employee, and it is these accomplishments that most supervisors become fixated on, because there are evidence available for such assessments. And it is these outcomes that can be directly linked to objectives of the company. So these results-based measures might include measures of, for instance, number of units sold. So if you are in an organization where the standard that have been set for you is your ability to sell a particular quantity at a particular time, then that can be the basis for your assessment. The divisional profitability. So the branch of the company that you are working with, or the division that you are working for, what sort of profits are they making at the end of the year? Cost reduction. How are you able to save costs by using a more effective and efficient performance strategy? And the quality of goods that you are churning out to the markets. These can be the metrics that can be used when we are using results-based measures. Now, unlike traits and behavior measures, results-based measures are often criteria that can be measured objectively. So when it comes to profitability, that one you can't lie. If the company is making profits, we can all we can all see it from the final records that will be prepared by the company. If we are actually cutting down costs in our production, it will be clear to all of us, because the number of wastages and breakages will reduce tremendously. If the quality of our goods and services is also superior in the markets, we can discern this from our customers. These are easy metrics that can be objectively measured. So, more importantly, results are generally more meaningful to the organization due to their direct correlation with performance relating to divisional organizational strategy. So these metrics, you can directly link them to the objectives that the company aspires to achieve. So for that reason, they place much salience and attention to it. Now, although results may be a significant measure of performance of employees and traits and behaviors, it has its own limitations. The first limitation is that it may be difficult to obtain results for certain job responsibilities, especially if you are working in teams or in groups whereby your outputs or your results cannot be readily seen at the end of the calendar year, but it can actually be ascertained after a 5-year period. Then there wouldn't be enough basis for such a criteria to be used in appraising you. Although, of course, this long-term or 5-year target can be fractionalized into certain expectations that are expected to be attained at the end of every year. So that is the first one. The second one is that results are sometimes beyond an individual employee's control. So budgetary cuts and resource availability are at the direction of others, usually management and supervisors. They have to be able to stick to the needs of employees by making the budgets available and the resources available. So when these are not forthcoming and you are going to appraise employee on the basis of their success or failure in performance, then what will be your locus? Because you are not checking all these parameters that equally have a role to play in their success or failure. Finally, results are limiting in that they fail to tap into some critical areas such as teamwork, initiative, and openness to change of performance of modern organizations. So, modern performance management system may sometimes require people to be working in teams. And working in teams will mean that you cannot single out an individual and give a candid and a true representation of their performance. At the end of the day, the success or failure of the team will be contingent on individuals' performance. So when you single out individuals to be appraising them and be deriving whether they have successfully discharged their responsibilities as far as their performance is concerned, at the expense of the team initiative and contribution, then it will be problematic. So which means that under such circumstances, the team's contribution to organizational success should supersede in the performance appraisal as opposed to the individual's contribution to organizational success. Unless, of course, you are interested in finding out how well each individual fared within the team, then that one we can have a more objective conversation, an objective way of assessing each individual's contribution to organizational success. Now, the next thing that we are going to consider, which is the next strategic decision that must be addressed in designing a performance management system, is how to assess employees' performance in the company. So, performance feedback or performance appraisal can be performed in two ways, either in an absolute sense or in a relative sense. So, absolute measures of employees' performance usually evaluates employees strictly according to performance requirements or standards of the job. So the focus of absolute measures is on how each individuals are faring in relation to the standards that was set for such individuals. So if this semester I say I'm using absolute measures to ascertain your performance in my class, it simply means that I will be interested in finding out how well or bad every student did in my class. That will be an absolute measure. Now, relative measures also try to appraise employees by evaluating employees in comparison to their co-workers. So unlike absolute measures, which focuses on each individual, the relative measures does the evaluation by comparing one employee to the other. And on that basis, you be able to summarize and tell how well the entire class or the entire department is faring, or who is excelling among the within the department, or who is distancing himself in terms of performance qualities within the organization. Once that is your focus, then you are doing relative measures because of the comparison that comes in with. Relative measures may further involve slotting employees into categories such as the top 10% of employees in the work unit receiving an overall outstanding evaluation, similar to what is known in education as grading on a curve. I say when we mark students' results, we often say that we are going to do moderation. And the results moderation simply means that we don't want to end up giving everyone 100, and I say everyone 90. So the results moderation, and we also don't want to end up having the entire class failing. So we compare the results and the scores of the students in academia with what we call a normal distribution curve. And on a normal distribution curve, at least about 10% of the class must get superior A. So once we try A, and that is a strong A, then another 10% will also may be failing, depending on how well they took the class or how serious they took the class. Then another majority of them, which is about 80%, will be falling within the middle. So that is what we mean by the skewed, I can't say, the bell-shaped normal distribution of results. So once a baby be say, now the bell will look like this. Now, if you look at it now, first 10% will be here. The next 10% will also be here. 10% will be here. Then 80 will be in the middle. Now, next, we are talking about 90 to 100. And we are talking about 0. So, sometimes when you are marking, you realize someone is even struggling to write his or her own index number, let alone attempting the questions that you brought. So such people will be replicating the questions that are on the question paper in the answer booklets. So those ones, so there's nothing you can do about it. Others may also be presenting contents that are very much interesting and good to read. They are I can say handwriting and everything will be on point. Others may also be giving you average content. So that is what relative measures can be utilized to do. So at the end of the day, you know what number of your employees fell within the average in terms of their performance, which ones are substandard, and which ones are above the standard. And if some have been identified as demonstrating superior performance, those ones, you can sustain their superior performance by incentivizing them through some form of motivational schemes. Okay, that one will encourage them to give out their best. Those that are here, you can equally continue to empower them so that you push more of them here. And those that are here, you will need to diagnose their performance problem. If it is coming from logistical or budgetary constraint, then you help them. If it is skills deficiency, then you use TED to address it. So that is it. And a typical example of a relative measure is what we call force ranking. Force ranking. So one popular, although controversial means of relative assessment is force ranking. Force ranking or force distribution simply means that after evaluating and getting the performance score of every employee, you force it on a normal distribution curve like I drew on the board. And that one will help you, those that are performing above standard, those that are performing averagely, and those that are performing below standard. And that bell-shaped curve that I drew on the board, each component has the sort of interventions you can also throw in, like I clearly articulated a while ago. Now, we are going to look at measures of performance evaluation. How can you actually measure the performance of your employees to determine whether they are performing well or they are underperforming? So the next strategic decision that needs to be made in designing of a performance management system is the means of evaluation. Frankly speaking, there are so many tools that can be utilized to evaluate the performance of an employee. And this ranges from the traditional one that tends to place much power in the hands of the superior, to the modern ones that tend to grant a lot of voice and room for the employee to be involved in the appraisal process. So a typical example of the modern one is the 360-degree feedback appraisal, or the multi-rater approach that I mentioned. That is a modern one. And another example is also management by objectives. Another example is behaviorally anchored rating scale, the BAS. They are all modern ones. The traditional ones include the behavioral observation techniques, graphic or linear rating scale, the forced distribution that I explained earlier on, and weighted checklists. So let me explain them briefly. The first one is the graphic or linear rating scale. Graphic or linear rating scale is a type of traditional performance appraisal technique or performance appraisal tool, which is widely used by most companies because of the ease with which it can be administered. So what it simply requires is that the evaluator must identify some performance attributes, traits, behaviors, or results that it is going to do the evaluation on. And each of these performance measure or traits is accompanied with a linear scale. So, for instance, let's assume these are the attributes that we are going to appraise every employee on, then it simply means that each of these attributes will be accompanied with a linear scale. And this linear scale is more or less like drawing a graph. That is why we call it graphic rating scale. So based on each attribute, you are supposed to appraise each employee on how well they fared on that attribute. So for instance, if I pick employee A, and I'm supposed to appraise him on quality of finished work products, then it will be accompanied by a Likert scale ranging from 1 to 7, whereas 1 means it is unacceptable and nothing to write home about, 4 is average, and 7 is exceptional. Okay. In the same vein, if I'm rating the traits or attribute of employee known as attention to detail, and it is also accompanied by a Likert scale ranging from 1 to 5, the meaning of 1 will be what? Unsatisfactory performance, whereas the meaning of 5 will be outstanding performance. That sets an example for co-workers. So this is a typical example of a graphical rating scale, wherein each attribute or each performance measure or attribute that is supposed to be appraised is accompanied by a linear rating scale. So that is, in simply put, what it means to be using graphic or linear rating scale. The second one that I'm going to explain is what we call the weighted checklist method. The weighted checklist method. So the weighted checklist method provides the supervisor with specific criteria on which performance is to be assessed. And it also requests the evaluator to check those criteria that apply to the employee. Now, different dimensions are weighted based on the importance to the organization. And these weights are usually unknown to the evaluator as the checklist is being completed. So this is a typical example of the weighted checklist criteria for evaluating employees. So these are the various items or attributes on which employees are supposed to be appraised. And if, as an evaluator, you read it and it applies to the person, you take it that way. So you are supposed to tick and cross aspects that apply and does not apply to the employee. Now, and you see they are all accompanied by weights. They are all accompanied by weights. But the evaluator at the point of conducting the appraisal will not see these weights. These weights will be with the HR, who will now apply them to it and give a final appraisal score to the employee. So for instance, for employee A, maybe he is able to address routine day-to-day problems effectively, then I will tick. Maintain cordial and productive relationship with co-workers, then I will tick. Display the ability to delegate effectively and develop subordinates. This may not apply, so I will not tick. Work well without direction. This may not apply to the person, so I will not tick. So at the end of the day, when the HR gets the form, and these days you can actually do it using an online medium whereby the tickings cannot be traced and the tickings and the weights cannot be traced to the person doing the appraisal. So at the end of the day, the HR can compute the weights that are associated with the various tickings, and on that basis, determine how well the person has performed in the company. So this is a typical example of the weighted checklist method. Now, BAS, or behaviorally anchored rating scale. So the full name of BAS is behaviorally or behavior anchored rating scale. So BAS is just like the graphic or linear rating scale. It's just like the graphic or linear rating scale, except that it is accompanied by thorough explanations of every rating that is being done. I would say the linear rating scale was just accompanied by a Likert scale, ranging from, let's say, 1 to 9. But the interpretation of the scale did not accompany it. So this Likert scale is ranging from 1 to 9. 9 will mean that the person plans work and organizes time carefully in order to maximize resources and meet commitments. But what does this mean? Okay, when you also give someone 1, it means appears to do little planning and may perform effectively, despite what seems to be the diagnosed approach, although the deadline may be missed. And what does that actually mean? So that will mean that the associate never makes a deadline even with sufficient notice, which means such a person, if the behavior continues, the performance problem continues or it ensues, they may be earmarked for dismissal. Because no matter how hard the company tried to help improve your efficiency, you are still not catching up. And so it will not be wise to have you in a company for a longer period of time. So such people no contract they will not even renew it. And when you give someone 9, which means he plans work and organize time carefully, blah, 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 what does it mean? It means even though this associate or employee has a report due on another project, he or she would be well prepared for the assigned discussion on the projects. So essentially, this goes beyond the linear rating scale or the graphic rating scale to give you interpretations of each rating. So as a supervisor or a stakeholder that has been tasked to utilize this approach to evaluate an employee in question, you will have a thorough understanding of each number you are assigning to a particular behavioral attribute. So that is the BAS. Okay. Now, a potential problem with the use of behaviorally anchored rating scale may be that an employee's behavior is inconsistent. So sometimes the employee might merit a 6 on a scale of 1 to 7. At another time, performance would be closer to 2. So under such dispensations, the use of BOSS will be more appropriate. And that BOSS simply means behavioral observation strategy or behavioral observation skill. So a BOSS addresses the problem of inconsistent employee performance by measuring frequencies along the scale. So instead of providing examples of different behaviors as would be presented in a BAS, a BOSS determines which behavior of a BAS is optimal and asks for an assessment of the frequency with which an employee displays it. So BOSS goes beyond BAS by placing much importance on the frequency with which a particular behavioral attribute is occurring. So that if the frequency is low, then you must as well apportion a lower rating. And if the frequency is high, then you can apportion higher rating. The next one is what we call critical incidents method or critical incident measures. So critical incidents methods do not generally utilize a scale. Rather, the evaluator provides specific examples of employees' critical behaviors or results, either outstanding or problematic during the performance period. So let me explain it this way in order for you to understand. Unlike the BAS, the BOSS, the graphic linear rating scale, the forced incidents, and the forced distribution, and all that I've explained thus far, which tend to employ a lot of numbers and quantitative approach to the appraisal. The critical incident method is more subjective, and it requires the appraiser or the evaluator to write a thorough essay which is rich in details to demonstrate specific strengths and weaknesses that can be identified with the employee. So all that I'm trying to say is that when you decide to utilize the critical incident method and the evaluator is someone who is very much lazy and does not document day-to-day happenings on an employee, then they will experience what we call poverty of imagination. When the time is right for them to actually write the critical incident that matter to reflect the performance outcome of the employee, they will struggle to do it because they do not have a repertoire of information on how well or unwell the person is performing. So for critical incidents measures to be utilized, the evaluator must maintain a log or a diary for each employee, which, in my candid opinion, most supervisors may be lazy to be doing it. We are talking about maintaining a diary or a logbook on every employee. And make periodic notations of noteworthy behaviors or results that were particularly effective or ineffective. This process can be what? Time-consuming, but it allows the feedback to cite specific examples. Critical incidents is not the type of appraisal where the supervisor can just you have to be citing copious examples. And that is why we call it critical incidents. Things that actually occurred during the performance calendar. And use it to juxtapose the performance and non-performance of the employee. So that is it, critical incidents method. Then the last one that we are also going to look at is management by objectives. Management by objective. And it is actually one of the modern methods of appraising employees. Management by objectives. Just a minute. So, management by objectives, it used to be called MBO. It's an approach that grants room for the views and opinion of the subordinates to be sought right from the beginning of the performance calendar. So at the time where the performance standards are even being sought, the employee is construed as a key stakeholder and they are involved, they have a sit-down interaction with the appraiser or the evaluator. So this process involves having an employee meet with his or her immediate superior prior to the time period for which performance is to be assessed. And the two parties jointly agree on the employee's work objectives for the forthcoming time period. The process of the negotiation is important here. Ideally, this process involves setting objectives that are simultaneously consistent with the organization's strategy and satisfy job requirements, and also provide challenging work assignments that are consistent with employees' developmental needs and career aspirations. So the bottom line of management by objectives is that the supervisor or the manager has to manage the performance of employees together with the employee in question. And this has to be done in a harmonious or a cordial environment where the two parties involved can judge together and come out with a more realistic objectives that is in tandem with the long-term aspirations of the company as far as that of the department. And once this is agreed upon, it is adopted as the strategy, the standard that needs to be attained by the employee in question. Now, after setting the standard, the employee will be given an opportunity to perform. Then, so that is where the employee will be working if it is supposed to be revenue-based. Then the employee will be allowed an opportunity to generate this supposed revenue. Then the third stage in management by objective is where the appraisal will be conducted. And during the appraisal, it is done in conjunction with the employee for them to have a thorough discussion of all that transpired. And feedback will be granted over there. And lessons will be adduced from this feedback in order to help the employees improve in future. So that is essentially management by objectives. And that brings us to the end of today's class.